In this video, I'll be covering how to shoot weapons in Unreal Engine 5. I'll be going over how to set up semi-auto, full auto, as well as BurstFire weapons, which allow you to shoot and kill enemies. This video follows on from my weapon system tutorial series, so if you aren't yet up to date, I'll link the first episode on the screen now and also in the video description. So let's get into creating a shooting mechanic. Let's start by going into the content browser and opening up our base weapon blueprint. In Unreal, there's two main ways to make a gun fire. You can either use a physical projectile bullet which travels through the world and collides with enemies, or you can use a line trace which instantly checks along a line to see if a target has been hit. In most cases, it's better to use a line trace as it feels more responsive as hits are registered immediately. So that's the method I'll be covering in this video. First, we need to add a point where our line trace will start. So select the gun mesh, then click Add and search for an arrow. I'm going to name this Shoot Arrow. We want to move this to the end of the barrel of the gun where the bullet will be travelling from, and we also need to rotate it to face the direction that the bullet would be travelling. It can be useful to change the view like this to help better align the arrow with the end of the gun. It's also worth positioning the arrow just in front of the barrel so that the line trace doesn't immediately collide with the gun mesh. Once you've done this, open up the event graph. Here we're going to set up the event which creates the line trace. As all our weapons are a child of this base weapon blueprint, this event can be accessed and used in all of them to create a line trace to shoot the weapon. So we can delete these events, then right click and search for a custom event. Name this something like Create Shot Trace. Next, with the event selected, we're going to add an input. Name this Range. Then set the type to float. This will allow us to pass through a value to set the length of our line trace, so that we can use different ranges for all of our different weapons. So that we can set the range in all our different weapons, we need to create a variable that's also called range, and is also of the type float. Now that we've done this, we can drag off the event and search for a multi-line trace for objects. A line trace is a line that can be created between 2 points. In this case, the start point would be at the barrel of the weapon, and the end point would be at some distance in the direction that the gun is pointing. If the line trace collides with an enemy anywhere between those 2 points, it can be registered as a hit and damage can be applied to them. Next, we need to calculate the start and end points for our line trace. The start point is just the position of the arrow that we added, so drag it into the graph, then drag off it and search for Get World Location. Then we can simply connect that to the start pin. Next we need the end point, which will be at a distance in front of the gun. To find this, drag off the arrow and search for a Get World Rotation. Next, drag off this and search for a Get Forward Vector. This gives you the exact direction that the arrow is facing. However, at the moment this is just one unit line in that direction, so we want to multiply it by a large number. For this we're going to connect up the range, so that we can easily change how far each gun shoots. Next we want to add this to the arrow's world location, so the trace starts at the gun and extends outwards. Then we can just connect this to the end pin. Next, drag off the object types and search for a Make Array. As we'll be shooting at enemy characters, I'm going to go to this drop down and set it to pawn. This means that our line trace will only detect hits if it collides with a pawn. Next, for testing, we can set the Draw Debug type to For Duration. Later on in the video, we'll set up the logic for applying damage to enemies here. Finally, in some space, right-click and add another custom event. Name this one Shoot. This event will be the one triggered in the character blueprint when the player presses the shoot input. The purpose of this event is to be overwritten by all the children of the base weapon blueprint, so that we can set up different systems for semi-auto, full auto and burst fire shooting. These systems will all use the Create Shot Trace event, however it will be triggered in different ways. We're going to start by setting up the simplest system, which is semi-auto. So compile and save, then go to the content browser and open up the base semi-auto weapon. Start by deleting these events. Next we want to override the shoot event from our base weapon, so that we can create a system for our semi-auto shooting. To do this, hover over the functions, then click the override drop-down, then select the shoot event. Now that we have this, right-click on it, then click Add Call to Parent function. If you connect this up, it basically allows for the parent's original logic in the shoot event to run before our semi-auto logic. Currently we didn't add any logic to our parent shoot event, however it's useful to include this in case we do in the future. Next we're just going to drag off this and search for the crate shot event. We want to pass through a range for our semi-auto weapon, so drag off the pin and search for a get range. We can set the range for this weapon in the details panel. I'm going to set it to something quite high, like 2000. This logic is now all set up, but there's a couple things we need to do before we can test it. The first being adding an input that we can use to fire our weapon. So go to the content browser and locate your input actions folder. Next right click, then go to input and select input action. Name this IA_shoot. We don't need to do anything to this, so we can just save all. Next, open the content browser again and locate your input mapping context. Open it, then click the Add Mapping button. Go to the drop-down and select our Shoot Input Action. Next, click the keyboard button, then press left-click on the mouse to set this as the input to be used to fire our weapons. Now you can just save and close this. Next, we need to set up this input in our player character blueprint, so open the content browser and find it. Open it, then in some space, right click and add our shoot input action. Next we want to drag in our current weapon variable, then drag off it and search for an isValid. This will basically make it so that the shoot event can only be triggered if the player is actually holding a weapon. Attach this to the started pin. Next, drag off the current weapon again and search for the shoot event from our base weapon blueprint. Connect this to the isValid pin. Now if we compile and save, we should be able to test out our semi-auto weapon. If you pick up the semi-auto weapon and start left clicking, you will see that a line trace is being created out the end of the gun. You may notice that if you rapidly left click, you can spam spawn in these line traces. We want to set a limit to how fast you can shoot in the form of a fire rate. We want to be able to set different fire rates for all of our different weapons, so we'll start by opening up the base weapon blueprint. Here we're going to add a new variable and call it fire rate. Make sure that the type is set to float. This variable can now be accessed and changed in all of our children weapons. So compile and save, then open the base semi-auto weapon. Here we want to add another variable that we're going to call canShoot. Make sure this is set to Boolean. This variable will work in conjunction with the fire rate to determine how long the player has to wait between shots. Initially, we want the player to be able to shoot, so compile, then go to the details panel and set the variable to true. Next we want to move these across, then drag in the variable and get it. Drag off it and search for a branch. Connect it here, then connect the true pin to the create shot event. This means that we can only shoot if this variable is set to true. Next we need to set up the delay between shots, so drag off here and search for a set timer by event. This node can trigger an event after a certain amount of time has elapsed. So you can drag off the event and search for a custom event. Name this reset shot. Next drag in the variable, then click set. Set it to true, then connect it to the reset shot event. This will now re-enable shooting after a certain amount of time. We want that time to be our fire rate, so drag off the time pin and search for a get fire rate. With it selected, you can set its value in the details panel. I'm going to set it to 0.15. Next, just after the branch, we need to disable the ability for the player to shoot. So drag in the variable again and then click set. Leave this set to false, then connect it up. This system is now set up so that when the player shoots, the ability to shoot is disabled, then after a delay equal to the fire rate, it is then re-enabled. If we compile and save, then go back to the viewport and press play, we can pick up the semi-auto rifle and test this out. you will notice that you can no longer spam this weapon and our fire rate system is working. Next, we're going to set up a full auto shooting system. This is going to require a few more steps to get working. So start by going to the content browser and opening the base full auto weapon blueprint. Delete these nodes, then again we're going to override our shoot event. Right click and add the call to parent function. Connect this up, then drag off and search for a set timer by event. We're going to use this to trigger firing our full auto weapon. So drag off the time pin and search for the get fire rate. We want to set this to something a bit faster than the semi-auto weapon, so I'm going to set this to 0.1. Next we want to drag off here and add a custom event. Name this full auto shoot. Next we want this shoot event to be triggered continuously while the player holds down left click. So to do this we want to enable looping. This will loop triggering the event, delayed each time by the fire rate. Next, drag off the full auto shoot event and search for the create shot trace event. Then drag off the range pin and search for a get range. If you have it selected, you can set the range here, or to access all the values, you can go to class defaults, then set the range here to something like 2000. Because we're using a different weapon mesh for this gun, we need to quickly go to the viewport and move the arrow so that it's better aligned with the barrel of the gun. Now if we compile and save, then go back to the viewport and press play, if we pick up the full auto rifle and press left click, the gun will begin to continuously shoot. However, there's no way to stop it. So now we're going to make it so that when you release left click, the player will stop shooting. To do this, we want to open the base weapon, then right click and create a new custom event. Name this end shoot. This will work in the same way as the shoot event, being overwritten by the children gun blueprints to add custom stop shooting functionality to different guns. Next, go back to the player character blueprint. Here we want to make it so that the end shoot event is triggered when the shoot input is released. So I'm going to copy these nodes here, then paste them below. Then we want to drag off the completed pin and connect it to the isValid. Then drag off the current weapon and search for the end shoot event. This is all set up, so now we need to add the functionality to stop the gun from shooting in the full auto weapon. So hover over functions, then override the end shoot event. Right click on it, then add a call to the parent function. Then connect it up. When this is triggered, we want to stop the timer from looping, so that the create shot event is no longer triggered. So to do this, you want to right click on this return value and promote it to a variable. Call this timer. This variable can be used to stop the set timer by event from looping. So drag it in next to the end shoot event, drag off it and search for a clear and invalidate timer by handle. This basically just cancels the timer. Connect this to the event. Now if we compile and save, then go back to the viewport and press play, if we pick up the full auto rifle and hold left click, the gun will continuously shoot until we release it. These shooting systems are passed down to any children of these weapons. So for example, in the last video we made an SMG which was a child of the full auto weapon. So this SMG will inherit the full auto shooting system we just made. All we need to do though is move the arrow into a more accurate position. Also, we might want to go to class defaults and change some of the values such as range or fire rate to make it shoot more like an SMG. So I'm going to set the range to 1000 and decrease the fire rate to 0.05. Now if we compile and save, then go back to the viewport and press play, if we pick up the SMG, we can see that it's inherited the full auto shooting system. However, it now has a shorter range and a faster fire rate. Now that we've finished the full auto system, we're going to move on to creating a BurstFire system. Then after that, we'll move on to applying damage to enemies using these shooting systems. So first we need to create a new child blueprint for the burst weapon. So open the content browser and right click on the base weapon blueprint. Then select Create Child Blueprint Class. Name this BP_base BurstFire weapon. Open it, then select the gun mesh and replace it with the one you want to use for your burst weapon. Next, move the arrow into a better position just in front of the gun barrel. Next, go to the event graph and delete these events. Again, we're going to override our shoot event. Next, right-click on it and add a call to parent function. Connect this up, then drag off and add a set timer by event. This timer is going to loop through each shot for one burst of the weapon. So for the time on this, we're not going to use the fire rate, because we want to use the fire rate for the time between bursts. For this, I'm going to right-click on the time pin and promote it to a variable. I'm going to call this shot interval. So this is the time between each bullet being fired in a burst. To set this value, click Compile, then in the Details panel, set the value to something low like 0.05. Next, set Looping to Enabled. Drag off the event pin and search for a custom event. Name this Burst Shot. BurstFire weapons typically fire off 3 or 4 shots every time the shoot input is pressed. Say we want our burst to consist of 3 shots. What we want to happen is for this timer to loop 3 times and then cancel. To set up this logic, we first need to create a new variable. We're going to call this shot count. Then set the type to integer. We're going to use this to keep track of how many shots have been fired in the burst, so that when the value reaches 3, we can cancel the timer and stop the burst. I'm also going to add another variable called shots per burst. The purpose of this is so that if we create children of this burst rifle, we can set the value in this to change how many bullets are fired in each burst for different weapons. This one should also be set to integer. Most commonly, the number of shots in one burst is 3, so I'm going to compile, then in the Details panel set the value to 3. Then we want to leave the shot count value as 0. Now, drag in the shot count variable and get it. Drag off it and search for a less than. Next, drag in the shots per burst variable and get it. Then connect it to the less than. Next, drag off here and add a branch. Connect this to the burst shot event. Next, drag in the shot count variable again and get it. Then drag off it and type 2 pluses into the search bar to get an increment integer. This node will add 1 to the shot count every time it's triggered, and then save the new value to the variable. So what's happening here is that every time this event loops, it checks to see if the shot count is still less than the shots per burst. If it is, 1 is added to the shot count, and the event loops again. When the shot count is finally not less than the shots per burst, we'll add the functionality which will stop the burst. I'm going to quickly check that this is working properly by adding a print string to the end. But before we can test it, we need to quickly make a pickup for our burst weapon. So go to the content browser and open the Weapon Pickups folder. Then right-click on the base weapon pickup and create a child of it. Name this BP_base BurstFire weapon pickup. Open it, then select the mesh and change it to the same one we used in the weapon blueprint. Next, go to class defaults, then set the weapon variable to our burst weapon. Now compile and save, then go back to the viewport. Open the content browser, then drag the new pickup into the level. If you press play and pick up the burst weapon, then press left click, you will see that we get 3 print strings in the top left corner of the screen. This means that our burst is working as it should. So now we're going to make it so that our gun actually fires off line traces when it's shot. Open the burst weapon, then we want to quickly go to class defaults, then set the weapon pickup variable to our burst pickup. Next we want to drag off the increment integer and add the create shot trace event. Next, drag off the range pin and search for the get range. I'm just going to leave this set to 2000. Next, if we compile and save, then go back to the viewport and press play. If you pick up the gun, you can see that it now fires off a burst of 3 line traces. At the moment, we're only able to fire off 1 burst. So now we're going to make it so that the player can fire a burst, then there's a delay, and then they can fire another burst. So open the burst weapon, then go to the timer, right click on the return value and promote it to a variable. Name this timer. Next, come over here and drag in the timer variable. Like we did with the full auto rifle, we're going to drag off and add a clear and invalidate timer by handle, which will cancel the loop after 3 bullets have been fired. Next, we want to drag off here and add another set timer by event. This one will be used for creating a delay between bursts. For this delay, we want to use our gun's fire rate. So drag off the time pin and search for the get fire rate. I'm just going to leave this set at 0.5. Next, drag off the event and add a custom event. Name this reset burst. We want to leave this timer set to not looping, as we only want it to trigger once at the end of a burst. Next, drag in the shot count and set it. We want to leave this set to 0 so that the shot count is reset, ready for the next burst. We also want to add another variable, which we'll call canShoot. This should be of the type boolean. Drag this into the graph and set it, then set it to true and connect it up. Now before the first timer, we want to drag in the canShoot variable, then drag off it and search for a branch. After that, we want to drag in the variable again, leave it set to false, then connect it to the true pin. So now, if the player shoots, it checks if they can shoot, then immediately makes it so they can't shoot. Then after the burst and the delay, shooting is then re-enabled, and they can fire off another burst. So now if we compile and save, then go back to the viewport and press play. If you pick up the burst weapon, you should be able to fire off a burst of 3 shots, then wait a second, then fire off another burst. Next, we're going to make it so that our weapons can apply damage to enemies when they're shot. For this, we need to go back to our base weapon blueprint. Here we want to go over to just after where we create our line trace. Drag off the return value and search for a branch. If it returns true, that means it's hit an enemy. Next, drag off the out hits and search for a for each loop with break. This will allow us to cycle through all the enemies we've hit with one line trace. Next, drag off the array element pin and search for a break hit result. Expand this, then drag off the hit actor and search for an apply damage. Connect this to the for each loop. We want to make it so that all our guns can apply different amounts of damage per bullet. So right click on the base damage pin and promote it to a variable. Call this damage. Now that we've done this, we can compile and save, then go over to one of our weapons. Under class defaults, we can set the weapon's damage. So for the burst weapon, I'm going to set the damage to 10, meaning 10 points of damage will be applied per bullet hit. Next, I'm going to compile and save, then go over to the full auto weapon. Here I'm going to set the damage to something a bit lower, like 8. Next, I'll go over to the semi-auto weapon and set the damage to something higher, like 15. As my SMG is a child of the full auto weapon, it will already have inherited the damage I set for it. So if you want, you can change this as well. The final thing we're going to do is set up a quick enemy blueprint. This is so we can test to see if our weapons are now applying damage. So open the content browser, right click, go to blueprint class, then select character. Name this BP_enemy. Open it, then select the mesh and give it a character mesh. If you need to, move it down into the capsule component. Next, scroll down in the details panel to the collision section. Here we want to set the collision preset to no collision. This is so the line trace doesn't collide with multiple components of the enemy, causing damage multiple times. Next, we want to select the capsule component and check that the collision preset is set to pawn, as this is the type of object that our line trace can detect. Next, go to the event graph, then delete these events. Right click and add an event any damage. This will be triggered if the enemy is hit by a line trace, as we added the apply damage node in the base weapon blueprint. It will also pass through the damage from the weapon the player is using. To test that this is working, drag off and add a print string. Then connect the damage to the in string. Now compile and save, then go back to the viewport. Here we want to go to the content browser and drag in our enemy blueprint. If we press play, then pick up a weapon, then aim it at the enemy and shoot it, you can see that the weapon's damage is being printed in the top left corner of the screen, indicating that our damage system is working. Now we're just going to set up a quick health system for our enemy, so that once they receive enough damage they are killed. This system will be very basic, but I have a more in-depth video on health and damage systems already on my channel, which I will link on the screen now and also in the video description. But for now, go back to the enemy blueprint. Start by deleting these nodes, then we're going to create a new variable. We're going to call this variable health. Set the type to float. Click compile, then we want to set this to how many health points we want our enemy to have. I'm going to set it to 100. Next, drag it in and get it. Drag off and add a subtract node. We want to subtract the damage applied from the gun from the player's health. Next, we want to set this to be our new health, so drag in the variable again and set it. Connect it to the subtract, then also connect it to the event any damage. Next, we want to check for when the health reaches 0, so that we can kill the enemy, so drag off and search for a less than or equal to. We can leave this set to 0, then drag off and add a branch. If this returns true, it means the enemy has died, so I'm just going to add a destroy actor node. For testing, I'm just going to add a print string here and connect it to the health variable. If you compile and save, then go back to the viewport and press play, then pick up a gun and shoot the enemy, you can see in the top left that its health is decreasing by 10 each shot. Then once its health equals 0, the enemy is destroyed. Finally, we want to go back to the enemy blueprint and delete the print string. Compile and save this, then go over to the base weapon blueprint. Here we want to go over to the multi-line trace node and set the draw debug type to none. If you compile and save, then go back to the viewport and press play, you should now have working semi-auto, full auto and burst fire weapons, which apply damage to an enemy. In the next video, I'll be going over how to add some visual effects to this weapon system, including muzzle flashes and bullet impacts. I will also be including some weapon sound effects to make these guns more realistic. So if you would like to be notified when this video is released, hit subscribe, then press the notification bell. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and comment below what you would like me to cover in future videos. If you would like personal assistance with these tutorials or help with your own projects, check out my Patreon in the description below. Thank you so much for watching.